September 27th, 2023. Well, a few days ago on the Judge Napolitano show, his podcast, they had a guest on Jeffery Sacks, who was a professor at Columbia University. Actually, he's an economist, and he, along with another individual, Neil Harrison, had published a paper. And previously, he'd been on a commission by Lancet, a British medical journal, to study the origins of COVID-19. And some really surprising developments happened, which were also supported by a whistleblower from the CIA. And this is leading to a rather shocking development, actually. It may very well be that COVID-19 is actually a product, probably accidental, of a U.S. government-funded research program. And this is a bit of a shocking situation, but it turns out that the National Institutes of Health and the subgroup that was, I forgot what it's called, that Dr. Anthony Fauci was in charge of, was basically funding this group. Now, this effort, I guess you'd call it. You've heard of the term gain-of-function research, I suppose, discussed a lot in the hearings before the Senate, and all the conflict between Fauci and Rand Paul and so forth, and the question whether or not we were engaged in gain-of-function research. Well, it seems like maybe we're talking about semantics there, but from a common sense point of view, for a non-expert, effectively we were. But if by that you mean we were looking at research that would increase the infectiousness of a virus, and apparently that's what's really was going on. And it would seem likely that there is this project then was a joint project between the U.S. Government health institutes and the Institute of Virology in Wuhan, China. And this doesn't this sound a little bit similar to all the discussion about the biolabs in Ukraine that was discussed previously, where some of the dangerous stuff was put offshore, if you will. So that's kind of the situation we're looking at here. By the way, if you like these videos, please give me a like, subscribe, ring the bell, and of course you can share those with anybody that's interested. Yeah. So any rate, so we'll get into the issue. How this was that there's a researcher at the University of North Carolina who was an expert in manipulating viruses and actually changing their genetic codes, and apparently he has some of the most advanced techniques in the world. And apparently there's a possibility that he might have created this thing. I'm not sure if that's been confirmed yet or not, or whether somebody else might have done it. But the point is that the natural SARS viruses, which had outbreaks, as you know, in the early 2000s, and were relatively incredibly minor by the comparison of the COVID-19, which is also a coronavirus. But the difference is there's something called a fural cleavage site that exists in viruses, which helps them be very infectious and as breakthrough cells and cause replication, which is what makes a virus infectious in humans. And this fural cleavage site was not in the natural coronaviruses from the bats. But the researcher here basically was interested in basically the purpose of this was, I guess, just to study what made viruses infectious, and I guess being able to identify one that's particularly dangerous early on and maybe develop a vaccine against it or something like that. But I mean, I don't think there was any, I want to emphasize that there was no, I don't believe, any malevolent intention in this at all. But but on the other hand, research can be dangerous even if there's no, malevolent intention. But the idea was that they would create these virus mutations and then test them out on, I guess, human cell samples and stuff like this in the laboratory, supposedly under safe conditions. and to see if they would infect the cells and replicate the virus or not. And the theory that's being put out is that somebody genetically, presumably this scientist, since he's the one that would have the skill to do it, may have put one of these cleavage sites in an existing natural coronavirus and manipulate it so that it would then become an infectious virus. And then this was presumably then sent to the Wuhan lab for testing. I guess the dangerous part where you're really trying to infect cell samples to see how it would perform. And apparently sometime around, I guess, September of 19, some of the researchers there became infected, probably due to maybe inappropriate safety conditions in the lab. That leaked out of the lab. The person then went home and perhaps on a train or something like that, whatever bus, whatever means of transportation, started spreading it to people they knew, and the thing slowly spread throughout Wuhan, and then from there due to international travel throughout the world. And that's the theory that's being put forward here. Now, what's also interesting is this: if this is true, I mean, I guess this at this point you have to say is a theory. It's not, it explains what's been happening, because as you know, there was Fauci and others and the government have been very intent on covering up the origins of it and indicating it was a natural mutation. Okay, and you know that they've been saying that, and that it had nothing to do with this research. Well, if in fact their research had inadvertently caused this pandemic, that would have the effect of making us, the United States, somewhat liable for this whole fiasco, which absolutely damaged the world to a great extent, right, including ourselves, of course. And it also is kind of interesting because the Chinese had sort of blamed us for it, if you recall, and we all were kind of laughing at them. Maybe not, huh? But at any rate, it's certainly their fault too, because they mishandled the thing and had it in a lab that didn't have adequate control conditions. But nevertheless, the other thing is a whistleblower from the CIA came out and claimed that when the Biden administration early in the term had ordered the CIA to do and other labs do an investigation into the origins, that originally 6 out of 7 experts that were working on this had concluded it was probably due to genetic manipulation, again because of this cleavage site. But the point is that they were then basically bribed, if you will, with substantial bonuses if they would change their position and say it was natural. And I guess they did, and that's why the conclusion was that it was natural. It was put out and accepted at the time, because essentially they're really trying to cover up this whole disaster. And of course, you can see why people like Fauci and others would want to do this, obviously, since they were basically funding what actually happened. At any rate, that's a breaking issue, and the House Oversight Committee is looking into this. And so I guess it's kind of a back burner scandal that's out there that hasn't really taken off yet, but it seems to have a lot of potential to have some major repercussions. Any rate, I just thought people would be interested in this. This is something I came across, a little novel there. There's an article that describes this in more detail and gives you some information about the researcher I mentioned and so forth else. It's an Intercept article, and I'll post it in the description below for people that really want to get into it. There's a lot of technical jargon about molecular biology and stuff, which, by the way, is not my field either. I'm more of a math and physics type. So, but at any rate, if anybody wants to read through it and see what the basis of this is, I think that's pretty good. And there's also an episode of Judge Napolitano's show where he goes into that as well. I guess I could put a link to that in the description as well. So if anybody would be interested, but I thought you might find that fascinating and maybe a little scary. Anyhow, so at any rate, I'll be wrapping this up. Of course, as always, we'll be posting it both here on YouTube and also be posting on Rumble, and the addresses of my social media accounts are in the description below, and you can look at those particularly on X for a variety of other comments I'll be making in between videos, sometimes on a variety of topics. So at any rate, until next time.